Welcome to Householders, a conversation about American life as Zen practice. I'm Inga Annie Wade.
And I'm Kyosaku John Mitchell, and we're lay members of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center.
You know, when you're in the daily grind and you're like, I have to work 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and then I'm gonna have 2 days off to do all this other stuff. This sort of routineness, but also just the sort of focus on like everything that's going on and just like let's zero in on this. I kind of feel like has made time go by even faster than it already has gone by. And I know that when you're meditating, time does seem to go by very slowly. And not to say that, I don't know that you want time to go by slowly, but don't you in a way? Because I feel like as time goes by, there's inevitably changes that are happening, like getting older and, all these changes happening that can just seem to pass you by, and you're not really like enjoying life if you're just kind of like zeroing in on everything and everything else is passing you by. I don't know. So I'm wondering like how we could almost leverage meditation to create a more even-paced perception of time.
So is even perception of time desirable? Is that what you're implying? Like I see where you're going with like slower is better, or like you don't want to miss out on life
right
by having time fly by.
But sometimes people are like, oh, they like it when time flies by. They're like, time flies when you're having fun.
Right. Like, why would that be if that were, if time going by were a bad thing?
It's not even like when you're a kid, things go by a lot slower.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's taken years for me to turn from 6 to 7. I don't know how that works, but it took 3 years for me to turn 7 years old after I was 6.
Yeah. 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 I've thought about that a lot. It's funny. It is kind of related to the sort of weird perception and childhood kind of stuff that we've talked about that made us susceptible to Zen practice maybe. But the way I've always related to that sort of time dilation is that time is so much bigger of a percentage of your life when you're little.
Yeah.
And so there's what I've felt, and I think is pretty common to feel, is that time accelerates over time. If that makes sense.
It accelerates. I mean, my 20s, so, because I'm 30 now, and so I have my entire 20s. A lot of stuff happened in that decade. Like a lot of stuff. But it feels like a very short amount of time. Like it was only like, I don't know. It's like my memory of high school it doesn't feel like that long ago. And my nephew is in high school now. So that feels like I was just like my nephew like a couple of years ago, but I wasn't. That's not true at all, but it feels like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like think about how long it felt. Think about how old you felt when you turned 10, like that seemed like an impossibly long time had passed. And then from 10 to 20 was nothing compared to that. But then 20 to 30. Yeah, it's amazing. And so like I've had like a theory about that being just sort of a perceptual thing where like a day is like nothing now after 30 something years of days. But when you've only lived for like 5 years, a day is a much bigger chunk of time, relatively speaking. So it feels more significant or something like that. But I don't know that really gets at that doesn't get at everything about how the perception of time works. I don't think. I mean, you pointed to it when you were talking about, you've said in a few different observations that so much has happened. And I think that is really what has the most to do with it myself. Like time, the flow of time is like a measure of how much stuff is happening. And so that sort of explains to me why sitting, staring at the wall, not doing anything, the passage of time can feel big and expansive, but having an amazing time with all your friends, it feels so much faster because there's so much more happening in the same amount of time. And the way that experience works, it's like you're present for the things that are happening. And when there's many things happening, you're present with all of those things in like little pieces that all feel like now, and then suddenly like all those nows amount to, a thing that happened that's over. Whereas when you're sitting staring at the wall, there's only one thing happening and it's continuing to happen and happen and happen and happen. And then whatever sensations are arising and passing, like those are happening, but those are little and familiar compared to the experiences of like new weird stuff happening out in the world or like stimulating conversations. So that it seems like there's some sort of rule there to me of like how much is going on determines how fast of an experience it is.
Yeah. Well, do your work days feel fast or slow to you?
Oh my God. They feel like not like, well, I guess there are sometimes exceptions when there's like one task that I have to do the entire day. That is,
oh yeah, that does feel slower.
That feels like an impossible slog. But most of the time, that's not what it's like. Most of the time, it's like stuff flying at me from all directions.
Yeah.
And I can't believe it's over when it's over. And I feel like I'm half done with all of those things.
Sure.
And well, yeah, and like that has to do with like an objective thing also, just like how much there is to do. But like because of the nature of that just constant distraction and interruption and new things piling up, it just feels like so much that when 8 hours have rolled by, I've attended to so many things that it just like I didn't even notice it go.
Yeah, I feel the same way. And it does depend on how many things I have to do, for sure. So the more things that I have to do, the quicker time goes by.
Yeah. Which is a bummer. You wish it worked the other way. Because if you had more to do, you wish you had more time to do it.
Right. Because I think that if time slows down too much for you, then you can get really bored.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's all this empty space around here.
Yeah. That sounds like Zazen to me.
Yeah, sure. You realize all this empty space that you didn't realize was there before.
Yeah.
I'm not the type of person to want to fill all my time with things to do. I like to feel that empty space sometimes.
Yeah.
Even if it's uncomfortable, I kind of do like think it's important.
Me too.
But I wonder like if is it possible to create empty space even when you have a lot of things to do?
Yeah. Well, sure. If you are, this is where like conventional mindfulness discourse would enter the picture. It would say like, if you pay attention to all your sensations and to every breath as it goes in and out and like every finger as it touches the keyboard, then you are staying with it instead of letting your sort of mind rush ahead to being done with it or think about something else and missing out on the experience in some way. But as I'm saying this, I'm starting to realize that I don't think that's actually how it works.
No, I don't know either, because you need a lot of energy. You need a lot of headspace to do that.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of stuff to do, most of your headspace and energy are going to go to like completing that task and not really paying attention to the sensation of the keyboard underneath your fingertips.
Right. And if you pay enough
that's
attention
a privilege.
To that, you'll just like get lost touching your keyboard. but there's something lower level than that too about it for me cognitively, which is like if I'm right about my theory about the amount of stuff, or well, actually we've agreed on this. If we're right about the amount of stuff happening being directly related to how quickly time feels like it's passing, that seems like the more mindful you are of an experience, the faster time should go, because because like every keystroke is like an incredible experience and every breath is an incredible experience. And that's more like going to a party with your friends and having fun than staring at a wall and being bored, as far as the perception of how much is happening to me.
But I think that's the thing. Like, you have to be able to bring it into some of these situations. I think it could certainly for me sometimes be easier to be mindful if I'm just sitting there having like lunch with someone. But it could be harder the more things that are happening. We go back to it. So if it's a party and there's like lots of people talking and you're just eating, you're shuffling around, there's music blasting, I don't know if those are really the type of parties I go to, but in this hypothetical situation.
I remember those as something that happened in the distant past.
Well, anyways, if there's a lot of stimulation for me, the more difficult it is to be mindful, because there's a lot of things to process at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think the more simple the experience, the easier it is to process. So I think that's why Zazen is so good at what it does, is because it simplifies everything to just like sitting down and that's it. So and I mean that's the practice, right? So you're practicing doing that, so when you're in a more high stimulation environment, it could be easier to recall some of that. But you know, then there's also something I've thought about before, like, should we be practicing in those types of high stimulating environments? Because there's the whole, like, I guess is the theory that like you learn in the situation you learn in is the easiest way to recall those memories. So if you learn things underwater, you might not be able to recall what you learned underwater above water.
So what is that? So which one? So is work? So you're saying if you learn to practice in a stressful environment, then practice would be connected to the stress.
No, but you would be able to pull up your what you've learned from the practice easier.
Right. So you're practicing in a dark room staring at the wall with nothing happening is a way of sort of learning into your body how to be relaxed, so that when you're in a high stress environment, you can.
But I'm wondering if we need to also practice in high stress environments.
Right. I see. Well, so here's how that comes up for me, because, you know, I'm in a lot of high stress environments that put the amount of stress in for example, a work situation completely to shame. Like, I would take a day at work, you know, in a heartbeat to get out of some of the kinds of stressful situations that I find myself in, you know, at bedtime. What? And I mean,
as a father?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I'm being a little dramatic, but it's like definitely to me harder to put a 2-year-old to bed than it is to do anything I have to do in my job.
Okay.
So the practice does kick in. I'm needing to call on that breathing, for example, in order to slow my body, in order to proceed through that situation the way that I want to. But it started to feed back on the practice too, in a way that might not sound good at first, but I think is actually very productive for how I relate to Zen practice. And it's connected to something Sensei says to me all the time, which is it's commonplace. I'm paraphrasing. It's commonplace to bring Zen to our job, but what we also need to work on is bringing our job to Zen. And that to Sensei, what that means is sort of expressing your own, it's an extension of our sort of whole household or ethos as a Sangha, like expressing, you know, designer Zen and father Zen and podcaster Zen as our way of showing up in the Sangha, and our you know, our source of our metaphors for speaking about Zen practice and things like that. Like, it's not just that we're all trying to become bald monks in black robes who do jobs. You know, it's that we're also simultaneously becoming, you know, fathers of two little kids who are Zen practitioners. So, you know, like the situation in my, I mean, what he's usually talking about is like how he brings his experience as a designer into his way of teaching Zen. So he's using design metaphors and design language and design thinking, and even designing our programming using his design principles, because he is relating to this sort of Zen undercurrent of his work in the world. What I'm experiencing is that, yes, sitting in a quiet, dark room staring at the wall is teaching me how to be calm in stressful situations as a parent, but also handling stressful situations as a parent is teaching me how to find that Zen place, the thing for which there is no words, while being active and stressed out, and bringing that onto the cushion. You know, for a long time, the predominant way my stressful life would show up on the cushion is by making me think about it constantly. So I would be sitting there trying to relax, and instead my mind would be running sort of scenarios of, you know, putting my kid to bed or doing something at work or whatever. But I've sort of sunk down beneath the surface of that and have started to kind of relate to sitting in Zazen as a stressful situation, but not in a bad way. Like my body sensations are intense, my emotions are intense, my thinking is intense. The whole situation has taken on the same intensity as the stressful situations, rather than all of the intensity going down. You see what I'm saying? Because like that would have been my instinctual like assumption about what doing Zen practice for many years would do to stressful situations, is it would just lower the intensity of everything. But really, having more intensity is raising the intensity of everything, including sitting in a dark room staring at the wall, not doing anything, and learning to be in that as a stressful situation and adapt to it skillfully is where the real adaptation is coming from. And so I'm not like falling asleep on the cushion anymore. I'm dealing with stuff on the cushion, but it's not in a mental way.
So what you're saying is that the cushion is a high stimulation environment, but all the stimulation is coming from your head.
Yeah, well, my whole body, externally, my whole situation. Yeah, head was where it started, but now it's like all of the tension in my body is showing up as that kind of intensity. And I really don't think I just learned that by sitting in meditation for a long time. I think I learned that by the feedback back and forth between sitting in meditation and going into situations in like my life and getting stressed out. And like, I am learning how to be with tension from my life. And that is increasing my relationship. It's really hard to explain actually what it is. But the point is, it's not just thinking about stressful situations. It's like understanding that my whole body, that the situation doesn't really change that much as far as intensity goes. Like there's a lot of details that are different and a lot of experiences that feel different, but the intensity is just always going up.
So does that make time go faster on your cushion?
I think it does, but you said something at the very beginning that I'm really interested in that I want to bring in here, which was you were wondering it. I think I don't think you were saying whether you were sure one way or the other, but wondering about whether like evening it out is a desirable thing as opposed to going faster and slower all the time. And there is something kind of intuitively right about that to me. But it's contrasting with how this experience is going for me, where it's just like, it's not evening out. It's going, I mean, it is evening out, but it's not evening out at medium. It's evening out at maximum. Right. And I think that is another part of it. Like, I think evening it out does seem like it's helping me moment to moment, because I'm not, because when it's low intensity, I'm dissociating from it. And there is a point of too high intensity where I also dissociate from it. But like in the comfortable range, the most intensity possible is the most engaging. And I think that over time, I'm learning to engage with more and more intensity, and that pushing it higher and higher is what really is helping, if something can be said to be helping about like life from the practice. But the result of that, as far as it relates to this time perception thing, is that increasingly every moment, like increasingly it feels like time is flying by.
Yeah.
All the time. But it also feels like so much is happening that the time was full when I reflect back on it, you know? And that's an interesting distinction to make. Is like, yeah, when time flies by because a lot was happening and it was a good experience or whatever, we might look back and go, where did all that time go? But when you can look back and see like, oh, but all this stuff happened, like you were saying about your 20s, it still feels like a fulfilling reflection. Whereas the opposite, oftentimes, if I'm like sitting at the DMV for 4 hours, that could feel like a month. But at the end of that experience, it's not, I'm not going, well, at least I had so much like expansive time to contemplate. I was like, that was a humongous waste of life because it felt like longer than it was and nothing happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what you want is to be able to reflect back on an amount of time that's passed and be like, well, that was my life. That was life as it ought to be.
I mean, that's true. And I think I do kind of seek out like some sort of like happy tempo or something. That's not like really high stress, and that it's not sitting in a DMV either. Right. Yeah. Otherwise I would love sitting in DMVs, right?
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I got to get out of work so I could go to the DMV. But I'm not excited about that. I don't even want to leave work. I would rather be at work than be at the DMV.
Yeah.
But if it was something where it was just like the less intensity, the better, then going to the DMV would be an exciting thing.
Right. Right. But it's like going to the DMV. The only thing that's intense about going to the DMV is how bad it feels. Right. And so like, that's kind of what I'm talking about with these sort of developments in Zen practice of like bringing stressful situations onto the cushion, if that's a good way of at least referring to what I was talking about. Like there is a way in which Zen practice helps me understand how intense it is to be bored at the DMV, and learning to deal with that intensity is important in order to deal with other intense, boring situations. But that doesn't make it more desirable to go sit at the DMV and be bored. Like those are separate things. If anything, it makes me more aware of how much of a waste of time it is, because I can feel in my whole body how bad of a sensation it is.
And I think on the opposite end, I think it sitting meditation helps me understand that I am very like sensitive to stimulation. And it's not something enjoyable for me to be in really loud environments. And I've opted in recent times just not to be in them. That I don't have to force myself to try to enjoy a situation that is inherently not enjoyable for me. And that's something I learned from sitting Zazen. So, it didn't necessarily help me like be like, oh, now I can navigate these situations better. It's just been like, well, don't go if you don't want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Which sounds like, you know, the end game advice of Zen teachers is like, learn to be discerning about how you spend your time on earth so that you spend it in the right way. And like gritting your teeth and dealing with something unpleasant is sometimes necessary,
sure,
but that doesn't make it desirable. No. You want to be better at it when you have to do it, but that doesn't mean that you want to do it more.
Never really want to do it more. I think, yeah. But I do see, like, maybe it's just the amount of times you do something. If you do something a lot, it does get easier, regardless of meditation or not. Just like you get used to being in that certain environment, I think. But yeah, I don't know. Like, more desirable, I'm not sure. But it does become less agonizing if you do something a lot.
Right. Yeah. And that's a critical part of practice, right? Like it's I mean, you could apply that kind of change to getting better at anything. Like everything is agonizing when you start doing it for the first time. And then physical exercise, playing a musical instrument, whatever example you could possibly think of. Like, it sucks to be a beginner at something because of sort of your distance between where you are and where you might want to be. I think one of the things that's unique about Zen practice as a way of that as something you get that makes you better at everything, not just at sitting and looking at a wall, is that letting go of that desire to be anywhere, not because it's what Zen says to do, but because it doesn't make any sense. Like it's like nonsensical to think about like getting better at this after a while. And so you do, though. You get better at it, but not in a way that sort of conforms to a future. This is related to time. Like the bad way of wanting to get better at something is to project some future.
Yes.
And try and get to it somehow.
Yeah.
But it's still possible to get better at something without that. And
it absolutely is.
And you do it by settling into what's happening and figuring out the next moment, figuring out how to get from one moment to the next, and then like doing it over time.
Well, and I think you can also like lock yourself in. If you have like a future goal, you might be less open to what actually might happen or a different scenario of that future.
Right. And like, you can't imagine the particulars of it either. Like, you can have some very specific thing that you want to have happen. But you can't imagine so many other things about what is going to be the case when you actually get there, that you're going to be mostly wrong anyway, even if you do get the one thing that you imagined you would get. And that's what causes suffering, like in a very basic Buddhist sense. So the perception of that progress, I think, is intimately related to this perception of time that we're talking about, because you're constantly measuring like how much closer to the end of time am I from where I was.
It does feel like if you're reaching for a goal and you have like an end state in mind, it takes longer to get to that goal.
Yes.
Not physically longer, but perceptually longer.
Yeah.
Because I remember for the longest time, I didn't have a good paying job. So that was always the goal. I'm like, I want to be a career woman. I want to be successful, in quotation marks. Mm-hmm. And it felt like that took a really long time to get to. And it sort of felt like it would never get here at all. Mm-hmm. And now that it's here, I'm like, well, that wasn't that hard. Right.
You're not like a couple years from retirement.
No.
Or something. You have like a whole life now. It's interesting that we got goals into this conversation.
We always get goals back. We talk about a
lot, right? Yeah.
We've talked about it a lot. It's because it just seems something that rules my life, no matter how hard I try. But how do you, the idea is like, but how do you not have a goal? So, and I guess that's not how you do it. I don't think you don't have a goal, but you can't the goal can't be it can't be the thing that you're living for.
I remember why I brought it up. Because, right, it's what it is you can have a goal that's not about a future. It's not really, like, we might even be imprecise when we say in general Zen situations, like, don't have a goal. Like, you shouldn't have a goal for meditation or whatever. Like, of course you should. Like, this is how we've talked about it.
Yeah, but the confusing part is there's a lot of quotes that say stuff like that. Like, don't have a goal in mind.
Yeah. But I think what it really means is you shouldn't imagine a future that you are going to get to, because it's going to be incalculably different from the future that you're imagining, like when you actually get there. But you can have a goal to do something right now. Like, you can have a goal to not have a goal right now.
Yeah.
And accomplish it right away. And so you're still goals, you're still setting this sort of like motivation for yourself that you can kind of decide or at least discover emotionally in yourself. And that can still propel you forward, but you can do it as a sort of aspiration for a way of feeling or being right now that doesn't include like this imagined outcome scenario. That's not the same thing as the goal. The future you in the future world with the future things is not identical with the goal. The goal can be to experience the intensity of your life without freaking out. And that can be understood as a goal that's in the future, but it can also be a goal that you have and are accomplishing right this second.
Yeah. I mean, I find it's easier to have those goals now than in my 20s. Because I'm at a point now where I'm married and we have a house together and I have a good job and, you know, everything's pretty secure. I have the privilege now to make these goals that don't really have anything to do about the distant future.
Interesting.
I mean, I guess we could always make them. Don't get me wrong. I could always make more goals, but I am at a place that doesn't feel like there's a lot of consequences for not accomplishing my goals.
You've gotten it really householdery all of a sudden in a way that I think is really important and almost maybe worth like starting from the beginning on this idea in another conversation of like, what does security have to do with the ability to practice? And obviously it has a great deal to do with it. And it's some of it, I think, I'm just anticipating where we would get, has to do with reducing the amount of security that you need to feel secure, right? Mm-hmm. But I think another part of it is, what can you have faith in that doesn't require you to have it now without sort of creating this mental picture for yourself that you can never live up to. Because if you can, for example, like let's just imagine ourselves at like 21 years old, or like, the beginning of our Zen practice, we might have all these ideas and goals and conceptions of what it's going to be. But if I could have had the goal then of just experience the full intensity of my life without freaking out, as opposed to like some more concrete idea of, I want to be, this and that kind of person. If I could have just had the goal of like, can I deal with this as it is? I might be able to have faith that that's going to lead me to more skillful decisions, to better relationships, to being more impressive in job interviews, to the kinds of things that lead to that kind of security without having to imagine what they're going to be. If I can just have confidence in my ability to stay with the situation and not tense up and freak out and get stressed out. And that would have been hard to explain to me at the time. But I think maybe part of what happens when we get to our mid-30s and our married career, in my case, little kids phase of our lives, is you can kind of look back on that and realize that the reason that happened is because I showed up, not because I did this or that thing to prepare for it, but like because I was there at the right time and like able to deal. Either one of us could have like freaked out and run away on our partners that we are now married to.
Yeah,
that could have happened.
There could have been that time for sure.
Yeah, and it didn't happen. So like, what happened? Did we achieve the goal of getting married? No, we showed up to a real relationship that was actually happening.
We still show up,
and we keep doing it, and that's how you stay married. Just keep getting up in the morning.
Yeah, because it doesn't end with being married. You still have to like keep doing all the things you're doing, even more so sometimes.
Right.
But I think that a part of the 20s is that you have to experience those things and you have to like accomplish enough to feel, to understand what accomplishing things really means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a learning experience.
Yeah.
Householders is a production of the Atlanta Soto Zen Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Silent Thunder Order. Find us on the web at ASZC.org.
Our Sangha depends on your support. You can donate by PayPal to donate at storder.org. Gasho.